Is Islam a religion of peace or a jihadist ideology? That's a question provoking sharp controversy here in Germany since the right-wing populist party AFD started wooing voters with the message that Islam doesn't belong to Germany. It says that unlike Christianity or Judaism, Islam poses a threat to democracy. At first glance, developments in the Arab world might be seen as supporting the claim, for popular movements there have largely been stifled. So how compatible are Islam and democracy? That's what we want to talk about today on Quadriga. With Gudrun Kraemer, she teaches Islamic Studies at Berlin's Freie University and says it depends on how Muslims understand and live Islam. Muslims can be good Democrats. Antje Bauer is a Berlin-based political scientist and an expert on Islam. She says the recourse to religion is often used to cover up simple power interests. This is true not only for Islam, but for other religions as well. And with Alan Posener, who is a columnist for the German newspaper Die Welt. He says being religious means serving God before the state. And in this respect, Islam is no different from Judaism or Christianity. Professor Kraemer, let's begin by taking a look at what's driving the AFD. It won quite a bit of support in regional elections recently with its anti-migration stance. So is this latest turn simply a further refinement of that xenophobia?
Well, I think so, to an extent. It's a shift of focus, I would argue, because the majority of refugees that have come into the country over the past few years are of Muslim creed. And religion. But I think they also feed into a widespread feeling of unease and possibly even a sense of threat among certain segments of the German population. And they're constantly feeding into it, and I think adding to a very, very problematic atmosphere in the country.
But the fact is, Alan Posener, the number of migrants entering Germany actually has been falling since some of the initiatives that have been taken by the government. Is this really then a desperate ploy on the part of the AFD to stay in the headlines?
No, it's what they realize is the more radical they get, the more they tap into the vast number of people who haven't voted hitherto, who don't vote, who are dissatisfied with the system as a whole. And they take xenophobia, Islamophobia as a vent for their dissatisfaction with the whole parliamentary system. So saying, that Islam is somehow undemocratic is like the pot calling the kettle black, because what the AFD is after is actually attacking the whole parliamentary system as non-representative of what the people really think.
Populist parties everywhere at the moment, Antje Bauer, are in revolt against what they call political correctness. Is that part of what this anti-Islam talk from the AFD is about?
Somewhat, yes, because political correctness was, for example, used last year when there was 1 million of refugees pouring into Germany. So what they see is that there's nobody who is really defending Occidental interests or the interests of Germany. The rightists, the extreme right, want to have a strong Germany. And so what they say is somehow to create a picture which is to say, oh, these ones, they are too soft, and they are avoiding Germany to develop and to have the strength which they should have in the world.
So polls this week showed the AFD with record numbers. If an election were to be held this coming weekend, the AFD would get 13.5% of the national vote. That's only about 6 percentage points less than the junior partner in the governing coalition, the Social Democrats. That puts the AFD on a par with established parties like the Greens, Gudrun Kraemer. Does that mean people like this new message of anti-Islam?
It's very difficult to say. I would again come back to this word, or term rather, of unease and a latent sense of threat that you find among many people who would not really vote right-wing if they were at the polling station, I would argue. So, yes, it's expressive of a wider sense, but it's also a conscious urge to push people even further in this direction. Now, I would say that we're not yet at the polling station. We'll see what comes over the next few months. And of course, the other parties are also very active, trying to shift the focus of attention to other issues, so as to sort of take off some of the weight that's been put recently on the question of immigration and cultural cohesiveness and authenticity, etc. I mean, these identity politics are extremely interesting. And of course, we also have to look at the contradictions between depicting German values on the one hand and this claim to be true to Western values that the AfD is putting forth.
Alan Posener, what do you think? Will the AfD win points? Is it winning points with this talk?
Yes, it is and it will. It's happening all over Europe. And it happened in the 1920s and 1930s. This is what you do. You mobilize people's unease, you turn it into anger, you direct that anger against a part of the population, be it Jews, be it Muslims, be it whatever, who happen to be in the focus. It's easy, they're different, they're not the same as us. And you use this for completely different power political ends. And it works. It works in France with Marine Le Pen. It works in Poland for Mr. Kaczynski. It works in Hungary for Mr. Orban. It worked in the 30s for Mr. Hitler, and so on and so on. So this is, this is just horrible. It's bad. It's evil, and evil works.
Is it so evil that the head of the Central Council of Muslims here in Germany is right when he compares this talk on the part of the AfD to Nazism?
I think this might be a little bit exaggerated regarding the dimension which it has right now in Germany. But in fact, I think there's something coming out which we didn't see since 40, 50 years. I think we see a part of the society coming up and having a weight inside society which they did not have before, maybe because they didn't speak out, like you said, because they didn't vote. I think there's something else. I think there's like a feeling of parts of the Germans right now that they don't understand the world anymore, that it's not the world they used to know. It has become more complicated. Germany has taken a lot of years to understand that it's a migration country. Especially the right part of the conservative part of the population try to deny that and to say, okay, they will go back. And so now is the point where they have to recognize there are many people who are coming from outside and who have a different religion or maybe a different culture, and they come here to stay. And so I think what's going on right now is also a lack of capacity to adapt to a changing situation and to understand that in a globalized world, things are different and Germany is different.
That's a detailed description of the unease that you talk about, Professor Kraemer. Do political elites get that? They have roundly condemned these statements by the AfD. Are they doing enough to reassure those who feel this sense of unease?
Well, the thing is, how do you reassure someone who's xenophobic? I mean, how do you tell them that the world is made up of different people? We're living in a globalized world. Society will have to change. And of course, I understand that certain people don't see why they should change simply because refugees come into the country, who they welcome. But that's life. And I do not think you can reassure them. What you can do, of course, is work on social policies, and really do something against this within the limits of the rule of law, of course, against the violent expressions of xenophobia, just as you have to do something against violent expressions of Islamism.
Which, of course, was slow to happen, but is to some degree now happening with some prosecutions. Speaking of political elites, this latest controversy, of course, arose in connection with a draft party program by the AfD in which it turns on its head a formulation that had been used by a former German president. He said, Islam belongs to Germany. The AfD says it's in its party program, Islam does not belong to Germany. The Chancellor has now strongly reinforced that earlier message. Let's take a look.
For my part, I'd like to repeat what former German President Christian Wolff said. Islam belongs to Germany. That's true. I also hold that opinion.
Islam is not a part of Germany, but fully integrated Muslim citizens, they are a part of Germany.
So, Ellen Posener, AFD leader Frauke Petry there, the second half of those two soundbites, she didn't sound like the neo-Nazi she's often portrayed to be. Fully integrated Muslim citizens are part of Germany. What's to object to there?
Well, the first part of your question was, does she sound like a neo-Nazi? No, of course she doesn't. Well, firstly, she isn't a neo-Nazi, but she is a racist. She's the leader of a party which is going for racism ever more. The point is, we're always waiting for people to run around with skinheads going like this. That's been proved not to work. Now it's, the softer approach. And the second thing is, yes, what does it mean, fully integrated Muslims? Am I a fully integrated Muslim if I demand that the school where my daughter attends, they serve halal meals? I think I am. It's my right within a democracy. But there have been attempts to force schools to serve pork in Germany in order to exclude these people. So I mean, what do you mean by fully integrated? And this is the kind of soft talk that in the end the point is to say they can't be fully integrated because their religion isn't going to allow them that.
Antje Bauer, up to 5% of the German population is Muslim. Figures aren't quite clear, but up to 5%, not a negligible number. Would you say most of those would meet Frauke Petry's criteria of being fully integrated?
Yeah, I think that's what you said. The question is, what do you call fully integrated? Do young women, Muslim women who wear a scarf, are they fully integrated? Because for the AFD, they are not, because the AFD asked them to push away, not to use the headscarf. So the question is the definition. I think it is clear here. I think the authorities talk about 1,000 people who are terrorists or would be terrorists, possible terrorists, and all the others are not, obviously. And most of the Muslims here in Germany even don't go to the mosque. They don't even pray. But I think that's not our deal to talk about this. Do they pray or do they go to the mosque? I don't care about if my so-called Christian neighbor goes to the church or not. That is their private thing. As long as they stuck to our constitution and they live peacefully, that is what the big majority of them do. I don't have a problem with them.
A look at this draft program of the AFD does indicate some of the points that it might expect fully integrated Muslims to give up, Professor Kraemer. It would ban the call of the muezzin. It would ban minarets on mosques. It would ban the public wearing of both the burqa and the niqab. Isn't that at some point tantamount to banning the religion itself?
Not necessarily, because according to Muslim theologians and lawyers, you can practice Islam without those elements. But that is a minority position. That's not really representative. And I would argue that the problem is that this position stands in conflict with the German constitution, because we are a secular country with a freedom of religion within the bounds of legal requirements. And there's nothing in the Constitution that bans the wearing of the headscarf. That would be my position. You can argue about the full-body veil, because that is a different matter altogether. But I do not see how constitutionally you can defend the ban on minarets. You might argue that when the muezzin really disturbs the public peace and prevents people from sleeping, etc., there might be a limit to that. But that's not what they're talking about. They try to make Islam invisible and to ban any expression of Muslim affiliation, and that is a problem, and it does not go together with our laws.
Ellen Posener, the AFD's draft program appears to want to make a distinction between Orthodox Islam and other forms of Islam. And it claims that Orthodox Islam is not a religion, but a political program, quote unquote. Would you say that that's true, if not for moderate Muslims, then perhaps for fundamentalists? In other words, does Islam lead directly to theocracy if you take it at its most fundamental?
Yeah, every religion leads to theocracy if you take it at its most fundamental. So does Catholicism, so does Protestantism. We've had Protestant theocracies, for instance, in Geneva, in Switzerland, where, by the way, minarets are banned today. We've had the Pope was a theocrat until the end of the 19th century. We've had, you know, we have theocratic communities like the Mormons in the United States of America. We've had, you know, parts of Jerusalem. You try and drive a car Friday evening, you're going to get stones thrown at you because it's Shabbat. So, yes, there is a tendency in all religions, and of course, within Islam, to create theocracy. It's the job of moderate people within these religions, and it's the job of moderate states to curb that. The point is that within the Islamic world, there are no such thing as moderate states, not because of Islam, but because these generals, dictators of all sorts, have been oppressing the majority of the people ever since Kemal Atatürk, actually, and have forced Islam into opposition, which radicalizes people, as we know.
Antje Bauer, you also said in your opening statement, as did Alan Posener, that in the end there really isn't that much difference between the various religions when it comes to politics and the potential for violence. But is that really true? The Bible, for example, contains potential exhortations to violence, but in fact, few Christians today, even the most fundamental, would be ready to gird their loins and march into holy war.
Yeah, but the question is how you live this. I think the important point here is, well, how is the influence of religion on the state where you live in? So I think that is the important point. As long as you have a secular state where people abide to the state's laws, the role of religion is something which goes back to private life. So, and in the moment in which there's a conflict between religion and the state, obviously it is the state law which is the important one. So I think that makes the difference in the end. And you said that Kemal Atatürk was authoritarian. I agree to this. He was, but he was a sort of model. It was an approach top-down, but he was a sort of model who tried to make a secular state work in a Muslim state with a long Muslim history. And I think there were some things which worked out. Alphabetization, education, they have something, they have a core of democratic values. I think it can work. But the point is that you have to kick religion out. What they are going now, right now in Turkey, is that religion is coming more and more back to politics.
I want to come back to the Turkish example in a moment. But let me ask you this, Professor Kraemer, staying with the question of theology. One Muslim intellectual said after the 9/11 attacks on New York that although by no means every Muslim is a terrorist, most terrorists at the moment are Muslims. Is that link a theological link or a political link? What's going on?
It's usually very difficult to sort of clearly sort out whether something is purely religious or purely political. And I would think that there's a whole combination of factors that have led to that statement, and it is correct. That if you look at the present situation, the majority of terrorists are Muslims and claim to act in the name of Islam. But the problem lies in the generalization that you say, because that is the fact now. It has to be like that, and it's within religion. The Quran tells them to do that, and they only act and follow those injunctions. That is where the problem resides. And the imperative really is to deal with the militant Islamists rather than speculating about the evil and violent nature of Islam as such, which makes it impossible for Western societies to live in peace with their Muslim citizens. Because if you constantly tell them that they are the same as the militants, how should they act? How should they be part of society if they are under this constant cloud of suspicion?
Let's look beyond Western societies now, because when we take a look at the Arab world, it is the case that popular democratic movements there appear to be in retreat.
Tahrir Square in Cairo, the beginning of 2011. Hopes for real democracy in Egypt flourished. A revolution toppled the government of dictator Hosni Mubarak. In the country's first freely contested elections, the Islamic Brotherhood took power, but the movement didn't hold it for long. After months of turmoil, a coup d'etat led by Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the former general later became president in disputed elections. Since then, both the military and police have cracked down on opposition even more than during the Mubarak era. Despite that, many Egyptians accept the autocratic regime. If el-Sisi were toppled, they fear, the country could descend into chaos. Are the events in Egypt evidence that Western democratic principles simply don't fit in the Arab world?
Antje Bauer, why did the Arab Spring fail to produce a democratic summer? Is Islam somehow not fertile soil for those democratic seeds that were sown there?
I don't know if Islam is the problem. I think you had, on one hand, you had Islamic parties who said they did politics in the name of Islam. In fact, it was a power play. And they didn't want to share. They were in the tradition of dictatorship, like the dictators who had been forced to leave. So in most of the countries, the people who did not agree to them, they thought the only alternative is the other side. That is why we have this slashback, what we see in Egypt. And I think that's the problem. We have come to the old polarization between the so-called secular elite, which has established a dictatorship before and is establishing a dictatorship right now. Here or in Yemen, same thing. In Iraq, the situation is different, but it's also along these lines of power play in the end. And religion is being used for this.
The one country that's often held up as a counterexample, of course, Tunisia. Professor Kraemer, how stable is democracy there?
Impossible to say. Because I would fully agree with what was just said. I would not look at religion as the decisive element here. I would look at the very complicated mixture of economic problems and power politics and the fight between elites, because there are also Muslim elites or Islamist elites in these countries. So it's not just one side only. So Tunisia will succeed if it solves some of the economic problems and if it's not swamped and sort of completely absorbed with this refugee wave and the counter policies. It's small, it's off some of the major conflict points, that's in its favor, but it would have to deal with the economy, and if that does not succeed, it will not be a question of Islam or not. It will not be a very prosperous society. Let's put it that way.
May I add something to this? The interesting thing is that Tunisia has sent, in concrete numbers, the maximum of people to the so-called Islamic State, but they nearly all come from the internal parts of the country, which is much less developed, where the young people have no perspective whatsoever. And so that is something where they go, where they can identify themselves, where they get money from.
And glory.
Glory, yeah.
Alan Posener, the negative examples don't only come from the Arab world. Turkey was mentioned as a positive example, but the fact is democracy is looking pretty embattled there as well.
You know, Turkey's, well, democracy is always embattled. It's embattled in Ukraine. It's not even existent in Russia, which is a Western country, not existent in White Russia. Look at Spain, Greece a couple of decades ago. Come on. I mean, this is not a specific problem. And if it is a specific problem of the Arab world, it has to do with the fact that all these countries, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, were basically socialist countries with the state owned everything, elite controlled the state, the masses didn't have anything. There was no such thing as a bourgeoisie, a middle class which is the pillar of democracy. And it emerges that this middle class is often turns to Islam as a vehicle for gaining power, as they have done, as the AK party has done in Turkey. And if we clamp down on that and side with the elites who we call secular, who are just as repressive as anything we know from our own history, then we're making a huge mistake. Because we have to, you know, I'm not sure that, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood is a partner anymore, but they could have been if we turned to them in time. We have to realize that the more you oppress a religion and a group of people, the more they're going to radicalize. This is what has happened.
Professor Kraemer, just a couple of sentences. Islam and democracy, how do we make them a better fit?
You can invite Muslims and listen to them and ask them about their ideas of a good society and good governance. And what you'll hear is the rule of law, transparency, and perhaps even democracy. Not necessarily. So it's not Islam, it's Muslims.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks to you out there for joining in, and hope to see you soon.